definition of rural marketing. And we also discuss the various phrases, including what we mean by marketing efforts, and how do marketers actually not only satisfy the existing needs of the customers but also create new needs. Now let us talk about rural areas. Now, since we are studying rural marketing, naturally we should know what are basically rural areas, because our scope in this particular subject is limited to the rural areas because we are studying rural marketing. Again, if you are working with, let's say, some organization who sells in rural markets, then again, and you are working as a marketer with this kind of an organization, again your scope would be limited to rural areas. So we need to know what exactly we mean by rural areas. See, there are different definitions of rural areas. For example, according to the Planning Commission, now I hope you know that Planning Commission does not exist anymore and it has been now replaced by the Niti Aayog. This happened around 2015 or 16. But according to Planning Commission as it existed then, place an area with a population of less than or equal to 15,000 is a rural area. According to their definition, they considered an area having a population of less than 15,000 as a rural area. But then if you talk about the National Sample Survey Organization, NSSO, which basically collects data, conducts sample survey and collects data from different parts of the country, based on which the governments formulate the various policies. This is the job of this particular organization. So naturally, when they have to conduct their surveys, suppose they are conducting in rural areas, so they have to define first of all what they mean by rural area. So they have come up with 3 different criteria to define the rural areas, and only the areas which fulfill all these criteria, they will be considered as rural areas as far as National Sample Survey Organization is concerned. So what are the 3 criteria? You can have a look here. The population should be less than 5,000 and the population density should be less than or equal to 400 per square kilometer. Now population density, you know, you can find it out by dividing the population by the area. So if you want to find out the population density at a particular place, you divide the total population by the area. So according to NSSO, if the population density is less than or equal to, it should not go beyond 400 per square kilometer. Naturally, what this means is that the population density should be less, because if the population density is too much, it is likely to be a urban area. If you go to your cities and urban areas, you would find the population density can be very, very high. Per square kilometer, you might find thousands of people living. But that is not a case with the rural areas, where you find that the dwellings are scattered. The houses are not located at a particular point. They are at a good distance from each other. So naturally the population density has got to be low. And for the NSSO, the criteria is the population density should be less than or equal to 400 per square kilometer. Now the third criteria is, and now this is a very important one, that greater than or equal to 75% of the adult male population should be engaged in primary activities. Now we need to understand why this kind of criteria has been set. Greater than or equal to 75% of adult male population. What do we mean by this? Greater than 75% mean more than 3/4, a majority of. Adult population, why are we talking only about the adult male population? Because if you also include first thing, let us talk about why only adult population is being discussed. See, if you include the whole population, it would include probably children also of maybe 5 years, 6 years. These children are generally not engaged in any kind of a economic activity. So that is why we are excluding them, and to exclude them we are mentioning this particular term adult. So we are only going to have a look at the adult population, and within adult population only the male population. So you only have a look at the adult male population in a particular area, which means you are not taking into account the females in that particular area. You are also not taking into account people less than 15-16 years of age. The children which are there less than 15-16 years of age, they are not to be taken into account. Only those who are adult above 16-17 years of age and those who are male, they have to be taken into account for this particular calculation. So greater than 75% of them should be engaged in primary activities. So what do we mean by primary activities? You know, agriculture and allied activities. You know, we have discussed this earlier also in Indian economy. Primary sector, agriculture and allied activities. So here we are referring to that particular term only, the primary sector. You know, agricultural and allied activities. What do we mean by allied activities? For example, cattle rearing could be an allied activity. Horticulture, growing of fruits. Floriculture, growing of flowers. Pisciculture, producing silk. Trying to produce fishes. This is the meaning of pisciculture. So these are all allied activities. So all the activities which go along with agriculture, they are called allied activities. Now, if in a particular area greater than 75% of the adult male population, we have discussed all these terms, adult and male population, if they are engaged in primary activities, then only it is going to be a rural area. So now let's take an example. Suppose, for example, you go to an area and you find that 50% of the adult male population, they are let's say truck drivers. So then that particular area would not be categorized as a rural area. Why? Because they are not engaged. 50% are truck drivers. They are engaged in the service sectors. So naturally they are not engaged in primary activities, and that is why this is not going to qualify as rural area. So the main objective of setting this particular criteria is that most of the adult male population which actually go and do some work, most of them, they should be engaged in some primary activities, because this is what happens in rural areas. You have primary activities being done in rural areas. So this is one criteria which has been set up by the National Sample Survey Organization. Now you need to keep in your mind that all these three criteria have to go together, which means once a particular area satisfies all these three criteria, then only it can be categorized into as a rural area. Now the